Hey everybody, we've got the tip of John Bristow's head in picture here. You just need to adjust this real quick.
Oh,
Also have some severe lag at the moment. I don't know if it is the windows I have open or what, but hopefully it will subside here in a moment. Let me get your head cropped into the proper
I better stay in one position.
proper location here.
I'll make it easy for you. I'll just move around like the floating head. I'll do my Max Headroom impression.
Yeah, there's a setting I forgot to enable on the Skype input here, and we figured it out, but I keep forgetting to go back into my settings and fix it. So it's totally on me here, but it's just one of those things with live streaming that you get to do with OBS. It's just part of the fun. So
That's right.
just need to grab you and get you into frame here, and we'll be good to go.
It's like they say, if you're going to walk on ice, thin ice, you might as well dance. So there you go.
Try not to distort your head too much here. Ugh.
Oh, that's okay. I got a big head anyway, so, good luck with that.
Oh, come on. The tools in OBS are not my favorite. I need to try some of the alternative programs, to be honest. There we go. Let's get that. And then I'm trying to remember the key here. Crop you properly into frame. Ignore the man behind the curtain, folks. I wonder if anybody's still old enough to get that reference.
I think you and I are old enough that every reference we make, no one understands.
We'll go with that. That was a Wizard of Oz throwback, if
Yes.
anybody caught that, but that's just old-timer talk again. So this is our Eat, Sleep, Code podcast. We're gonna I keep forgetting to publish these as podcasts, so we're doing them live for now. Probably indefinitely now, but we are doing them live on Twitch now. And we just basically go over the latest and greatest tech news that we can find.
Yeah, it's more fun that way.
And we talk about it, give our opinions on it. And I see we've got some familiar names in the chat room. We've got Mr. TJ Vantel has joined us. Thanks for joining us, TJ. He's one of my coworkers and good friend of ours. I've got a subject that I want to catch TJ's opinion on here in just a second. Before we get started, let's give an intro, the proper introduction here. Hello and welcome to Eat Sleep Code, the official Telerik podcast. I'm your host, Ed Charbeneau, with my co-host, Mr. John Bristowe.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're well and safe.
So how have you been doing, John?
Very well, actually. We're getting a little bit into the autumn season down here in Australia, so weather's getting a little chilly relative to us, of course, not for folks in Canada or in other places that have different weather. But yeah, things have been good. Been working really, really hard. Lots of stuff happening, obviously, with everyone, and yeah, things are good.
Yeah, it's spring here. We're getting a lot of really cold weather for this time of year, though, so it's kind of strange. I don't mind it myself. It was like 40 degrees this morning, which is pretty chilly for this time of year. But I like it, so I'm not a summer guy. Bah humbug.
Yep.
So let's get into some tech news. We've got lots of articles lined up to talk about. This first one may ruffle some feathers. That is not the intention. It's just to talk about it. But this has happened before. And I'll go out on a limb. I say it's probably going to happen again. Last time it happened, it was called the left pad debacle. Looks like we've gone and left padded again, folks. So this is yet another one-liner NPM package that broke the JavaScript ecosystem. So I guess somebody pulled the plug on some little utility function thingy that is literally just like a couple lines of code that was put in an NPM package that does very little. So I'm not an expert on the subject, but let me make sure I'm not showing any not safe for work. I am. Let me scroll up. This is Reddit, and this is live streaming at its best. So let me just scroll away from the proverbial F-bombs. And you guys can peruse the thread yourself if you want to check out the rest of the text there. But the gist of it is there's a utility function that checks to see if there is a promise or if the function is a promise. So it's literally like a function that says is promise and returns a Boolean value if it is a promise to let you take some alternative code paths and whatnot. And I guess there are about 3.4 million dependencies on this project, and it disappeared in the middle of the night and like broke everybody's builds.
Yeah, I'm just reading through the issue thread here on GitHub, and it says that the module fails to import node 1312. And I guess the whole diatribe was about how it's missing that dependency, and as a result, broke a lot of people's code. So unfortunately, that's the way things go. But it's GitHub's problems now, right? So,
which is Microsoft's
we'll see what
problem.
they can do. That's right. We'll see what they can do. But I think it's unfortunate. I think people like to make jokes about this sort of thing. I think when it happens to you and you're working on your own code, it's not funny. But the pile on has already begun.
Yeah, this thread is very, like I said, it's already not safe for work, but it's very inflammatory. And people are very upset about what's happening with this NPM package and it breaking everything. So
Right.
Everybody's kind of like outraged. And then there's people now debating like how much code justifies something being a package. Could we have just copied and pasted these 5 lines of code into our project instead of depending on like this whole ecosystem of stuff, and just manage this if statement ourselves.
Right.
So, that's the nature of the beast that we work with in software development these days. Is first of all knowing your dependencies and what they do, and then making that decision. Do you want to take on the responsibility yourself, or do you want to put it off onto others? And what are the repercussions of that?
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, this is not exclusive to NPM, right? So there's problems with other packages that people have shipped, and so it can be a problem when those things occur. I've certainly taken a dependency on a package from NuGet and broken everything on my own. I think the fact that just given the nature of NPM being it's a very fluid environment when you're working with packages in the JavaScript space, because everything is sort of like JIT compiled, so you don't really know until you've already assumingly shipped. And so as a result, these things can bite you in production. Whereas, if you're using another package management system or programming language or build process, obviously that will isolate those problems early, presumably. But we're not saying that this is just a problem unique to JavaScript. It can be elsewhere, for sure.
Yeah, I haven't encountered this specific one in the .NET ecosystem because they don't allow you to pull NuGet packages out once they're up. The problem you do run into there is when you deprecate something. If there's not somebody around to maintain something, it can you can get versions behind, and that can break things. And then you end up getting locked into a place where you can't upgrade your whole system because it depends on this one thing that's still stuck in an old version of .NET. And we saw like a lot of that in the whole move to .NET Core. And
yes.
Hopefully,
so let's not throw stones in a glass house here.
Hopefully this gets better as we move to .NET 5 and not worse.
I remember when we shifted from ASP.NET to ASP.NET Core. I believe there was a version in there, I think it was 2 or something like that, where they had replaced JSON.NET with the Microsoft's internal version of it. Yeah, so that caused some problems as well. And there was lots of documentation about how you have to rip out that stuff. So I think that as much as we like to make fun of, NPM and these sort of dependencies breaking and such, and you can point to it like, oh, come on, it's promise. How easy is that? It does happen. And software is written by humans, and humans are imperfect. And until software is, I guess, better, we'll have these problems. So just the nature of the beast, I suppose. It also does hearken to the fact that when you ship software and you break changes, you introduce breaking changes rather, you have to be careful. And if you're taking dependencies on that, you have to do your due diligence. Now, I'll openly state myself. There are many times where I've been in Visual Studio or other IDEs, and I've just been like, meh, whatever. I'll just take latest of everything because that's the way I roll. And when you see the scroll bar in the errors window go from this to like this really quickly while you're compiling, it's like, oh, we're here now. All right, we got 900 errors. Great, perfect. Can't wait to hit all these. So it happens.
Yeah. I've dealt with some similar things with my own packages recently, trying to build things for Blazor, and I'll tell you what, trying to rename an npm package it's frankly impossible. So name things before you upload them to an ecosystem, because once they're there, they're pretty much stuck under that name, or you have to like deprecate the whole thing and like forward people onto the new one, and that's like new functionality in NuGet. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to firefight that before. I actually had to email the NuGet team, and they got me back with me in like within about 2 hours, because I couldn't properly deprecate my my old package and forward it to the UI just wasn't coming up, and I had to email them, and they're like, yeah, we don't know why that happened, but we fixed it, and then the UI started showing up. So yeah,
it reminds me of my days in computer science land when there's the classic phrase, there's only two hard things in computer science: cache invalidation and naming things. So there you go.
And off by one errors. That's the rest of the joke. You gotta follow up with that.
That's right.
So next, we've beat this one to death. Let's go to the next one.
That's right.
This is an article that you posted up here. This is the remote work repository by GitLab. The future is remote.
So GitLab is, I respect them a lot. I think they've got a really good solution for developers. They write a lot of great content, and mad respect to GitLab. They have a report that they've published called the Remote Work Report, and so I think the timing around this is amazing, obviously, given the fact that we have so many people who are working remotely. And they talk a little bit about how, in particular, developers are working remotely. They have a number of key takeaways that they summarize in the report. But if you're new to this, which I would imagine some of you are, I would imagine people who are watching Twitch probably are working remotely. But if you're new to this and you're kind of curious as to some of the issues that can become involved when working in a remote environment, especially with developers, there are some things that this report highlights that may be an issue that if you're a manager, for example, you can definitely take on as a call to action to try and mitigate the problems introduced by that. They all are. The report itself does talk a little bit about how working remotely introduces some challenges in regards to culture, in regards to feeling like you're contributing. But basically, it's a report that provides a lot of data on where people are, how they're working, what titles they are, etc., and the environments in which they're working with. Now, there's lots of information out there that talks a lot about how to work effectively, and this report doesn't really talk about that. So, there's lots of that stuff available, but it does provide an interesting insight as to how people are working remotely these days. And what's interesting about this report is that it's totally surging, obviously, for very important reasons. there are ways in which you can work remotely that are effective, as I said before, and then it's sort of like becoming this this sort of default mechanism of working. Now, one of the other things that I've said, which is sort of related to this, is that some people are finding the act of working remotely for the first time quite daunting. So there's this expression called Zoom fatigue, which people are finding is a bit of a challenge. I would say, yeah, that's definitely a challenge. Remote working is not just sitting in your office and, having Skype calls all day or Zoom calls and feeling like you can put your feet up. It's tough, but if you can discipline yourself in a right manner and also give yourself breaks and spread your work out, you'll find that actually, I find personally that you tend to be more productive. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, I find that remote work, I've been working remotely since 2005. So I've been working remotely for about 15 years. And I find that, it can be challenging in different ways. The sort of serendipity of working in an office isn't there. So there are ways to get around that. You can create these portals where you have just a place you can pop into. But generally speaking, I find that if you're working on something you need to focus, remote is king. But anyways, this report I found was interesting. Just the state of affairs, this report from GitLab.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Zoom fatigue. That was my first, I've worked at home for 5 years now, and I've never experienced something like this before when everybody else started working from home. It was like you had this influx of people that had no clue how to manage work-life balance.
Sure.
So my calendar was so full of meetings for the first 3 weeks of this. It was pretty unbearable. And after about the second week, I realized that it wasn't going to stop. I just started blocking my calendar out for just not quiet time, but productive time, where I could work quietly.
And
also,
for quiet time, you have to.
Yeah, it started putting things on there like breakfast and lunch, because I would just be accepting meetings and not thinking, oh yeah, you have to actually eat and, have bio breaks and whatever between all of this stuff. And then I was getting nothing done. So I was like, all right, I got to take control of my calendar. And I went the next weekend and just started blocking it out so people would quit putting stuff on it.
Yep.
So good stuff.
Yeah, like
there.
I said, there's tons of resources online you can read about working effectively remotely. This report doesn't talk about those things, but it does provide a state of affairs. If you want some good ideas about how to do that, just Google it. I mean, there's tons and tons that people are writing about it right now. So,
good deal. And we're going to move on to, is it time to build?
Right.
I think this one's getting a little off the tech. Well, it's still related to tech, but
I like Mark Andreessen. I think he's got some interesting ideas. I think he's definitely opinionated. And this was an article that he wrote last week, called "It's Time to Build," and it was an article that he wrote in response to some of the observations we're making in terms of the state of affairs relative to our global supply chain and Western countries and how we've positioned ourselves. And I think that what Mark's intention in here is, I think people have rightly sort of taken this essay and sliced it and diced it and criticized it, and that's fair. But I think the gist of what I got out of this essay was that, look, we have got to get back to making stuff for ourselves. And it has nothing to do other than with the fact that if we're clearly in this state of affairs where we push that responsibility onto others, then we are not taking responsibility for our own sort of things that we need in life, basically. And the gist of what I got out of it, and the reason why I mention it relative to this podcast, is because I think that is something that is a constant point of contention within software development, which is buy versus build. And I think that there are arguments to be made on both sides. But I think that relative to that, I think building software is definitely something that we do all the time. And I think that we need, and I think generally speaking, Mark's call to action was, if you're not building something, you should start building something. And he's not just talking about software, he's talking about basically all aspects of life. So from a societal perspective, from a community perspective, from an individual perspective, we've got to get back to building rather than just doing stuff that doesn't involve building, I guess. And it really speaks to some of the challenges we have that have been, I guess, there's been a focus that's been put on all kinds of things relative to our society, like supply chains and reagents for testing and PPE and all these sorts of things you've heard about in the news. And so Mark's call to action is we've got to get back to making stuff and being sort of self-reliant and self-sustaining. And I guess it's a kind of a shot across the bow of globalism, I guess. I'm not one of those tinfoil hat guys, by the way. But it's an interesting opinion. I think it's definitely pointing out something that is more than obvious, I think, to people, especially when people are ordering things that, you're having challenges, right? For now, it's very difficult to buy a webcam. For now, it's very difficult to, purchase a new PC. And those are delays in the supply chain. Now, I'm not saying that if we made those things ourselves in, say, the United States or Australia or Canada, that those issues would go away. But there are some challenges to be had when you have these dependencies, just like you have dependencies with is promise libraries, right? There might be an
I was going to make that connection. You beat me.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like we can't even write our own is promise function.
That's right. So dependencies can be evil. I'm not saying they are, and that there is some justification to build. And so I think Mark's intention here is good, in the sense of trying to put a call to arms. And I think at the end, he really puts it back in the hands of the reader, which is, I'll read it here briefly. He says, I expect this essay to be the target of criticism. Here's a modest proposal to my critics. Instead of attacking my ideas for what to build, conceive your own. What do you think we should build? There's an excellent chance I'll agree with you. And I think what it really speaks to is putting responsibilities back on our own shoulders to do things ourselves. And I think that, as I said, just kind of coming full circle at the beginning, I said there's definitely an argument to be had in the software field of buy versus build. I am an advocate for both. I'm certainly an advocate for, you should not be buying your own UI controls. You should be buying your own UI controls. You should not be building them yourselves. There's way too much complexity involved in building those things. You should be definitely buying your infrastructure tooling. You should not be building it yourself. There's way too much complexity to be involved in that. So there are certain elements of your software you should be buying. And I think that you'll save time and money by doing that. However, there are instances where I think if there are opportunities to automate, or there are opportunities to build software around processes, we should get building. We should roll up our sleeves and get building. There, I'll let you jump in now. I'm done.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, in regards to software, and excuse me, I'm trying to resize your face again because Skype.
Sorry. I'm leaning in. So I got excited there. Sorry.
So with the picture-in-picture problem we're having here is when the bit rate changes, your window resizes. But anyway, okay. In regards to the article, in relating to software, if we have folks in the industry that swing like totally both directions on this, and there's got to be a happy place in the middle. And I don't know how many times I've run into the person that like looks down upon the framework user. Like, I don't use frameworks. I write all of my own this and that, but that's got to stop at some point. There has to be a line in the sand where you consider something a framework dependency and you don't. You can't. I mean, you're not writing code from the assembly level and up. At some point, you've declared a dependency on something. Most cases it's like the Node, the Node framework or the .NET framework. Like maybe that's your leveling off point. You're like, everything from here up I'm going to write myself. And there's like people that won't use Bootstrap. They're like, no, I've got to write all these things myself. It's like, do you though?
I mean, there's definitely necessity is the mother of invention. So don't get me wrong. I think that if there are opportunities to out-innovate a library, or this sucks, I want to do something better, certainly I am not poo-pooing that. Mm-hmm. That being said, if you're doing it just because for you have the not invented here syndrome, or you just like feeling in control, or I don't know, maybe you've always wanted to be a framework developer and now's your chance to build something. That's I understand all that. There's definitely a natural inclination within developers, I find, because I felt it myself, to develop something because they feel in control. That being said, you have to liken it almost to if you're doing a project around the home and you go to the hardware store for picking up tools or materials, you're not milling the wood yourself. You're not going out there and chopping down trees for 2x4s, right? You're going and picking up planks. So, kind of have that balance, I think, when it comes to software. Now, getting back to the issue at hand, which is this essay, I think it's a call to arms to basically, not in a hostile sense, but basically in a, hey, we've got it within our means to do this ourselves. Why are we passing this over to folks who and basically exposing ourselves to problems, potential problems, right? If something like this happens, like a virus or something like that, then it can be a challenge for us to try and get those things going. And the PPE issue really is what I'm speaking to. This is really an issue we should not be having. And it's really sad that is an issue because these are the most important people in a time of crisis like this, your frontline folks. You've got to get them the right tools for the job. And it would be akin to, if you had a group of software developers without keyboards, you'd be like, listen, we've got to get these keyboards for people. This is like step 0, right? So,
yeah. I mean, I think it'd be more equatable to, you don't write your own authentication, security security software, but you also don't trust it all to one vendor. So
Correct.
If something is to go wrong, then it's all wrong, and you can't go, fill in with an alternative. Don't put all your eggs in one basket type of thing, and that's precisely
everyone's
what we've
screaming
done.
like, all right, we get it.
We get it. We get it. Stop. It's Waldorf.
Anyways, I thought it was an interesting essay.
No, it's really important stuff that people should be talking about these days. I think it's kind of unavoidable at this point to not have that conversation with what's going on. And it is pretty relatable to what we're experiencing in the tech world too. We've gone through all these offshoring of this, that, and the other thing in tech as well. As far as moving development teams to offshore and all that stuff too. So the pendulum swings. These things, I think, will go back and forth for a while. Speaking of developer tools and things, Resharper is a new update, it looks like.
Yeah, so Resharper recently just shipped a new version, 2020.1. Lots of great new things in there. You can definitely check that out. Been a fan of obviously Resharper for a long time, as are most .NET developers, because obviously it gives you these great facilities within your IDE. And to that end, lots of great new features, data flow analysis with integration for XAML, lots of great stuff. I won't bother going through the list, but Resharper definitely is a tool that has long been in my toolbox, or arsenal, if you will, and definitely worth checking out. Now, in relation to JetBrains and all the stuff that they've been doing recently, another article that I posted to the Trello board that's related to that is basically one of the things they have, one of their products called Rider. And recently they have been talking about Riders, their IDE basically. This is an IDE that they've recently started working on in the back end for .NET, and it's based on Resharper. And they posted an article that talks about .NET Core, the performance that they're seeing in Rider 2020.1. And so they have a lab that they've set up, and they've been taking some performance benchmarking relative for .NET Core versus Mono, and seeing how improvements have been made over time. So I thought that was also an interesting article relevant to that as well, and folks can check that out. And then finally, the thing that I included at the end there was that they actually have a virtual event coming up called .NET Days, and this is kicking off in May 13th to 14th, and they've got a bunch of speakers that will be talking about a variety of topics, including utilizing Resharper, refactoring things, writing F# code, writing ASP.NET code, .NET Core, et cetera, et cetera. So some familiar names in there, and definitely something worth checking out.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the evolution of Resharper. It was one of those things that people were kind of questioning about, I'd say it's about 4 or 5 years ago, when a lot of the features Resharper had got baked into Visual Studio proper. And sure. It looks like that's forced them to think outside the box and find new things that we hadn't even thought of before. And right. It's nice to see that they've evolved it into something of necessity again. And it looks like there's some really cool stuff there.
Yeah, I think the whole point there was that, Roslyn was a necessary thing that had to occur on the Microsoft side of things, and then people started kind of wondering, what does this mean for Resharper? I think it means that companies like JetBrains can continue to innovate, start to see where problems may lie. But I think I think both Roslyn and Resharper are necessary for the development process, and they both offer advantages, and how those tease themselves out, is interesting. I made the point during the last podcast that if you're a compiler developer, this is like probably one of the hardest jobs on the planet, because you're trying to take people's intention, which are in their head, and they've spewed out into code, into software language, and you're having to, like, balancing all these spinning plates. You're having to manage all this whilst at the same time produce an executable that can also be debuggable, that is performant, that is tracking changes, that is doing all these things. Like, this is a really, really hard thing. And if you're doing this on the fly, like a tool like Resharper does, to try and provide you with code hints and things like this is really hard stuff. Like, I really do bow down to these people, because they're doing such an incredible amount of heavy lifting just for us to get a squiggly line underneath here saying, hey, this doesn't look right, all props to them. I think these guys are doing a great job.
Yeah, there was one feature I just highlighted here. I mean, you don't get this stuff out of the box with Visual Studio. This is really nice. Comments in localization manager. So you just have some added functionality there in your localization manager, and a nice UX for it. So I mean, it's definitely got some really nice things that they're adding to the whole experience with unit testing and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Localization is definitely it's kind of like it's like the edge trimming on when mowing your lawn. You don't have to do it, but it looks way better if you do. So that, I meant localization in general. You don't have to, like, people look at that and like, it's color with a U versus not, so it's much more than that. And obviously localization and internationalization and globalization and all those sorts of things, the I-18N things, the problems with, numbers and with dates and all that sort of stuff. It's a real hard problem. So anything that can be done relative to that is goodness. Comments in the localization manager, that's great. Obviously gives people a heads up as to what this means, why it's important, etc. So good stuff.
I'm going to remind folks too, we are live, and we do have a chat room that you are more than welcome to post questions and comments in. It's been a little quiet today. Must be Monday. Everybody's still waking up, but
that's fine.
It's there. Feel free to ask questions. We're not shy.
Yep.
We'll take them. And this was totally unintentional. I have a very similar link next up for discussion, and it's an improvement in Visual Studio. So Visual Studio is changing the way that the Git experience works. So I don't know if you've ever used Visual Studio, or not Visual Studio, but Git within Visual Studio.
Yes, I have.
A lot of people don't know that the support is there, and they're really surprised when I show them some of the features that are there. But now they've moved the cheese, and this caught me off guard the other week. And it is in preview right now. It's Visual Studio Preview that I think is getting these updates. And the first one was in Preview 2. We're up to, I think, Preview 6 now. So
right.
This post is March 30th. You can see they're moving pretty quickly.
Hmm.
So there's been updates to this, but this was the initial announcement that was kicking off the UI updates that are happening.
Hmm.
And again, caught me off guard at first because it used to be under Team Explorer, and now it has its own Git tab. And they've kind of separated this out of Team Explorer into its own Git experience. And overall, it's been iterating through each of these preview builds and getting better each time. So I'm kind of looking forward to the final release when the next version of Visual Studio comes out, because it is turning into a much nicer UX. I was a little skeptical at first, but again, these are previews, so I'm not seeing like the whole complete picture. We're only getting, incremental updates, and they're iterating pretty heavily on these. So there's like on the first release here back in March, there was quite a few missing things, and I opened up GitHub repo and like couldn't find proper branches and things, and those are there now. But it's a really neat experience to check out. So look for the Git tab now in Visual Studio Preview. And you've got,
because we don't have enough tabs.
Yeah, well, there's always been one, but it was under Team Explorer, which I guess if you're not using.
Well, that harkens back to the old days of Team City, or not Team City, but Visual Studio Team Services and all that sort of stuff. So
yeah, so now they're trying to heavily integrate into Git. Where there was integration there, but it seemed to be more of a bolt-on feature than Git getting its own first-class experience, and now it's getting that, and it's starting to shape up, and it looks like they're working off some sort of feedback. I don't know the internal loop. I haven't really inquired on it, but but based on the iterations I'm seeing, looks like they're taking feedback on stuff and implementing it, and it's turning out really nice now. So it's something to take for a spin.
My opinion on this is that it's good. It's going to probably satisfy the requirements for a large chunk of folks. So this is akin to having, this is akin, I guess, to, having the tools integrated within the environment as opposed to working on the CLI. That being said, I would always recommend, if you can, learn the CLI first, because everything that is exposed through a tool like this is utilizing the CLI underneath the covers. So if you are a developer, and I understand both sides of this. If you're a developer and you don't really care, and you're like, dude, I just want to write code, I get it. It's fine. Use a tool like this. It will work well, presumably, and you'll be able to get your job done, which is basically just, pushing up changes, merging changes, commits, etc., pull requests, all that stuff. That stuff's fine. So for the 90% case, I guess that works. However, there are times when things go south in any type of repository or branch or things like that, and you've got to go to the command line. So I've always argued that command line first, CLI before UI is the phrase I've always used. But a tool like this, fine, no problem.
Yeah, ST Broader in the chat rooms says he uses Visual Studio or Git inside Visual Studio. So let us know what you think of these updates if you've seen them in the preview releases yet. The one that I'm highlighting right now in particular is really an improvement over any command line experience that I've had. And that's when you're trying to merge and you have a merge conflict. And Visual Studio team has broken that down into an actual checkbox scenario where you actually check in the line of code that you want to keep. This
is a hard problem, merging. So I guess adding to that the hardest problems in computer science phrase, I think merging is definitely up there, especially when you have complex. Merge conflicts are really, really tough sometimes. So I think they provide a very simple example here. It's like, oh, you changed the name of this, and we'll just accept the merge. And I'm like, no, it's sometimes merge conflicts can be like, really tough. And I guess that's where it helps to be a remote worker, because you can just scream in your office and no one can hear you. So
at any rate, this aims to fix the issue where you can see it
How bitter
briefly
do I
in the
sound today?
screenshot.
How bitter and angry do I sound today? I've got an extra saltiness to me.
No
today.
less than normal, I'd say.
Yeah.
So if you catch it for a brief second here in this GIF that's showing on the screen, and I know audio listeners won't be able to kind of see this, so I'll explain. The usual Git merge conflict resolution is this weird like arrow thing where you get like 17 greater than signs and the word head, or less than signs. I don't know which way you want to look at it. And then there's like this other part in the middle that's equal signs, and then there's greater than signs on the other end. And that is confusing as all get out. I can never figure that thing out. And I always sit there and stare at it like, just dead-eyed.
They're just delimiters. That's all they are. They're just delimiters, and then it generates a hash from that, which denotes the change. And then that's your merge area. So,
but resolving that conflict, you have to go in and delete out. Sometimes there's no right way to merge something, because you introduce problems on both sides. And again, it's showing like a very simple like example of it here, where it's just like one line of code. But when it's like several functions that are doing this, and you've got these weird, greater than, less than, equal than symbols like wrapped around everything hectically, you're just kind of like, you just kind of feel dead inside. You're just like, what have I done?
Generally, that's when I stand up and walk away. So, cool.
And we've got the chat room talking about how they yell at their computers too. So at least we're not feeling alone here.
Yeah. I love yelling at my monitor. It's great. You just punch the desk a couple times. Just get it out. It feels better. So
I have a handmade desk. I'm not punching my desk, but I have wanted to throw a laptop or two.
I know. I get that phrase from my wife. She's like, it's not so much that you're angry. It's just like I understand you're having problems with the merge and all that, and it's just like the dog starts shaking. I just don't think it's a healthy way to deal with your problems, So I'm like, yeah.
I'm gonna go ask directions to our next huge embarrassing failure.
I gotta work on that.
You're a huge embarrassing failure.
I don't think my Stream Deck is working. I was trying to play some of my memes here. I've got like the Tommy Boy, like, you're a huge embarrassing failure. Like that's that's the sentiment I get when the wife catches me like getting upset at the inanimate objects like my computer.
Yep. That's my whole life, dude.
What are you
just
doing?
getting upset at TV screens. So
like, that thing has no feelings. Why are you insulting it?
That's right.
Because it makes me feel better. That's why.
Mm-hmm.
This is a me problem. So next one up is we're talking about latest and greatest Microsoft things, it looks like. Blazor WebAssembly 3.2.0 Preview 5. Got enough numbers in there for you? So this is actually shipping weekly now. We're winding down to the end of the road here. So Blazor is getting ready to ship here in May. And it looks like the ASP.NET team is just digging their heels in and getting it done. So I originally put this on our to-do list to talk about on the show, and it was Preview 4. And a couple days went by, and now it's Preview 5.
Preview 5.
So by the time some of you see this, it will probably be Preview 6. Actually, I think I see
Preview 5. That is so last week ago.
Yeah. So yesterday. Actually, I think I saw a few minutes before the show started a tweet that the RTM bits are checked in on GitHub. So we will see what happens here shortly. But so far, these previews are moving quick.
Yep.
And what is outlined just here is not everything that you're going to see in an update if you haven't updated for a couple of weeks, because there's a lot of stuff just being thrown at us now. So they're working on configuration. If you're pushing this up to a server that's already got a web config on it, it's going to obey that thing. Support for time zone. There's like a lot of these last minute features being put in. There's a big change around HTTP client that went into Preview 4. So you might want to check your your HTTP verb commands out there. If you're using get async and put async is now get as JSON and put as JSON, and depending on which one you type, those few words can cause you a lot of headache. So get the ones that are shorter, like get async versus get as JSON async. The shorter version is the older one. It will get you the serialized result using I believe the old JSON.NET serialization. The other will give you an HTTP response, so you have to look and make sure you got a good response back before you can get the results from it. And then it's using the new JSON.NET, the new system.text.json implementation.
Just rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah. So that's a very big change, and I don't know if they're going to roll it as a breaking change in the final bits, but in the current one, both are supported. And I'm just using a best guess, educated guess here, and saying those will probably be a breaking change by the time this is done. So you might want to watch those very closely. So Blazor, again, shaping up for release here very soon. It's looking really nice. They're shaving down the payload size, getting ready for May. And I don't think they've actually announced whether this is releasing at build in May or not, but they keep saying May, and build is in May. So I'm not, not trying to break any NDAs here. I don't know for sure. Nobody's told me either way, but being a betting man, I would say this is probably going to fall
coming soon.
Either just
soon.
Before or just after or right on build.
I think we can say sometime in our lifetime. Okay.
Sometime in May.
Incidentally, I had saw this earlier, but I neglected to put it to the Trello board. A good friend of the show, Richard Lander, he has posted a blog post announcing .NET 5 Preview 3. I've put a link in the Blazor card that you have in Trello for this, and so they've also released .NET 5 Preview 3, and .NET 5 is definitely tracking on task as well, and so lots of great stuff in there. Mostly micro improvements to things that they're doing, but I think it's helpful to talk a little bit about what are the high-level goals for .NET 5 in general, and this is the real big push towards a unified .NET SDK experience, which includes all of the BCLs, the base class libraries, Xamarin development. There's talk a lot about, getting better single Blazor support projects, and lots of other stuff as well. The one thing that, we really like is the cloud native applications. So high performance, single file exes, less than 50 meg microservices, and support for building multiple projects, both locally and in the cloud. So lots and lots of great stuff. And continuous improvements as well. So Preview 3 now available. Go check it out. Very easy to install. Lots of ways to do that and start tinkering with the bits.
And I pulled up those JSON commands. They were in Preview 4 here, and it's get JSON async versus get from JSON async. That word from is either going to save you a headache or give you one, depending on whether you left it out or not. And then we get post JSON async and post as JSON async. So the word as here being the differentiator between one API call and a completely different one. So again, I think going forward, I think this is going to be the patch version where both work. And I think what's going to happen is that this initial one under the Microsoft ASP.NET Core.Blazor HTTP client will go away in an upcoming release, and those will eventually break. So you'll load old code up and you'll get red squigglies and you'll be like, why is this happening to me? And you just need to go in and put these new keywords in, and there's going to be some minor code changes because, again, they return a different response. They actually return an HTTP response message rather than just an object. So there is that to keep an eye on.
Yeah, certainly on the .NET Core side of things, which includes obviously Blazor. My observations around .NET Core relative to 2.1, 2.2 is that the HP stack could be better. There's some things that are in there relative to the .NET framework that don't do as well of a job. There's some missing parts and pieces that can actually really affect you when taking a dependency on that. And so, part of the thing I'm looking forward to is .NET 5, next version of I guess Blazor 3.2, whatever they're going to call it, is hopefully an improvement in that API and better support for edge cases. I recently saw an article on how to create a reverse proxy in .NET Core. So someone had gone through the effort of doing something like that. It's things like that I would like to see better support for. HTTP should be a first-class citizen across the entire stack, and that includes utilizing the HTTP client as well. It should be first-class support for everything, including HTTP 3. So I'm glad to see that .NET 5 is going down that route. They've got one of their improvements lists is to have support for HTTP 3. But definitely networking is so critical now for every application that it's got to be as best as possible. So
I'm glad to see we're getting actual HTTP responses back now and not just a stream of the data. I mean, seriously though, because what you have to do is if you're just getting data back, only data, for example, an array of some type comes back. Yeah. Then if that thing fails, you get an exception, period.
Yeah.
It doesn't come back that you hit
gracefully. It doesn't come back gracefully.
You're always getting a 200 back, but maybe here's an
cool, man. Don't worry, it should be okay. 200.
Yeah, here's a concrete example. You hit maybe the wrong endpoint or something, and you get an error back, and that error is you get a 200 response back, but you get an error page of HTML.
Yes,
instead
I know.
of a JSON response, and it's
it's all marked up and everything. You're like, oh, what? And then when you hover over it in the debugger, you're like, you realize what you've done.
But it's the error isn't anything to do with the function call. It's something like the serialization broke because you're getting the yellow screen of death passed in as your JSON response, and you're like, no, this isn't what I wanted.
I expected a JSON formatted string, except I got plain text, and then you're like, what? And you look at it and you're like, oh god, I got the wrong. I'm not even hitting the right endpoint, So. Yeah, having support for that would be good. Graceful support is also nice. I don't know. It's a hard problem, right? Because they're trying to provide something that's generic. So if you do get a 200 reply, what are you going to do, right? Dude, you said okay, You didn't say file not found. You didn't say 500 server problem. You said 200. So I get it. You know?
Some of it goes back to the API developer too on the web API side, but
Correct.
if you know that the consumer doesn't have the ability to grab those responses, then you're not going to shove, the right error codes back. So
I know I can see the guy with the chewed up cigar saying, "Dude, we're going 200 with everything. All right, no problem, no failure, nothing. We're gonna have our error code down to 0. I want to see 0 on our errors." I'm like, all right.
You just think of Tommy Boy when he's crashing the cars together.
Sure.
Lighting them on fire. Yep,
that's typically how API development goes.
It is.
You got Postman on one side, you've got, some other endpoint on the other. You're just baking and just ramming them together. So,
the last one I've got here for today, and we'll call it a wrap, unless anybody in the chat room's got something we should talk about. But Razor pages with any framework core and ASP.NET Core tutorial 1 through 8. The reason I brought this up is, again, related to Blazor. We keep getting a lot of questions here at Progress / Telerik components for Blazor. People keep asking, what do we do with Entity Framework? What are the best practices on using Blazor WebAssembly with Entity Framework on the back end? And since this is still in the process of being baked, the right thing to do is to look to Razor Pages, which was the latest UI framework to ship prior to Blazor. And these best practices will match up with what you need to do in Blazor regarding the backend. The idea here is any of these things are really just using HTTP calls to get JSON over the wire. So you would set it up on the back end the same way you would if you're using Razor Pages or MVC, and just do it that way. So you can follow this tutorial and then plug it into a Razor or Blazor front end, and it should work just fine. And those are the best practices you should follow for that. Now, that brings up another question of what do I do if I'm running Blazor server side? And the jury's still out on that one. So Microsoft is working on some proper tutorials and documentation on it, but they are still baking that. So that is not something that has a parallel technology that you can go find tutorials that already exist on. So you're gonna have to wait to find out how to do that the quote right way. It's very easy to make work. It's just people are looking for, those hard best practices, which they should be.
Right.
You want to make sure that you set it up to not fail in some silly way and use too much resources or that type of thing, or God forbid accidentally share data to another user it doesn't belong to or something like that. So it's definitely something people are looking for. There just isn't a Microsoft sanctioned tutorial out there I can point you to, but if you're using WebAssembly, there is, and this is the one you should be looking at. We did this on the show, on my Friday show last week. Ran through it a little bit. I tried to cut it as much as I could for brevity for the show, and I failed miserably and got an error I could not solve. When I was doing the tutorial prior to that show, not live, it took a little bit longer, but it did work as intended. So if you tuned in Friday and you saw lots of headaches and errors and me trying to figure out what they are, most of that was attributed to just the fact that I was trying to shortcut the system and not go through step by step. It does work as intended if you follow your instructions.
Entity Framework is a beast in some cases. I think once you wrap your head around it, you can be pretty productive. I have limited experience with Entity Framework, so I'm speaking a little bit out of school here, but generally speaking, I found that Entity Framework usage solved problems no problem, got me the data I needed, provided I'd wired up everything correctly. So, it is a framework, so you can't just, go willy-nilly. You have to follow certain protocols and procedures, etc. But generally speaking, I found Entity Framework did give me that level of abstraction I was looking for. The fact that I could, do link queries, I could, model my data quite easily, and the tooling was there was great. The challenge I found, obviously, was when you had, moving from one version to the next was always the problem. Things always broke. So that's the biggest problem I found with Entity Framework. Depending on what version you take, what dependency of version you take, things look different between docs. Things look different between frameworks. So that's always a challenge. Yeah. I think once that starts to settle down and stabilize, I think it will be actually quite a good experience.
So it'll be interesting to see what the naming conventions go to in .NET 5. Because in .NET Framework, we have Entity Framework. In .NET Core, we have Entity Framework Core. And then we're going to go back to .NET 5 without the core part. So will Entity Framework then become Entity Framework 5?
I think they're calling it Entity Framework Core 5.
Core 5.
Yeah.
I hope
just everything's got to be core, dude. All right.
Well, they're going to drop core when .NET 5 comes out. So seriously, they're dropping core in .NET 5. Everything will become .NET again. So I'm assuming the branch will then come back together and we'll have Entity Framework 5. And that won't be confusing to anybody.
No, not at all.
Naming things are hard.
I thought core was an interesting idea. The name itself was a good idea at the time, but I think it's caused a lot of confusion because it's not a clean separation in terms of naming. So that's just a side thing, but I get why they did that. So
yeah. So that's a wrap. That's all we've got for today. We should take a look and see if we can go raid somebody, because we are on Twitch, and that is what you do on Twitch. So
Yeah.
let me
You're
look.
you're like my son describing a video game to me right now. I have no idea what you're talking about. So
I'm gonna look into my
do the raid thing, whatever you got to do. So
crystal ball of things here. Let's see who we've got. We've got streaming here, and the idea is I'm gonna find another streamer. I'm surprised Mr. Fritz is not online right now. I'm not under my main account, so it's not like showing me the folks that I'm used to seeing. Let me see if I can log into my account off screen here, and I can see who we've got. We've got Kevin Griffin, I think, is on right now, and he's just launched a new stream. So we'll go raid him. I'm sure he'll appreciate that. So do you know Kevin Griffin?
no, I do not.
Okay. So he's from the relative to tech conferences and stuff.
Okay.
So I think he's from Kansas City, and you've probably bumped into him at a Progress booth numerous times. So we're gonna go ahead and raid him. So we're gonna pass our viewers off to Kevin Griffin's new channel. So thanks again, John, for joining me on the show.
Yeah, no worries. Take care, everyone.
Lots of good links that we got to share. So appreciate that. And thanks, everybody. Say hi to Kevin for us. So it takes a few seconds here. We're going to queue up the raid. We've got 9-10 viewers that we're going to go jump over to Kevin's channel with. And join me again on Friday on my channel. And we'll see you again next week on Code It Live for podcasts. Join us all week for all kinds of shows, though. We got Sambasu and lots of other great people here. So off to Kevin. Say hi for me.